All right, the recording has started. This is Pete Peterson, and I'm calling this meeting of the Ethics and Election Committee together. Today is September 29th. It's 2 minutes after noon. And we'll start with introductions. I'm Pete Peterson, the chair. Other members of the committee, please introduce yourselves.
Crystal Kennedy.
Jamie Allard, Assemblywoman.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And I believe the item on our agenda today is to go over changes to the Observer's Handbook. And please proceed, Ms. McConnell or Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Barbara Jones, and I am going to give a little bit of an overview about why we have set up a separate meeting for the discussion of the Observer's Manual. And Erica, when I'm done, is going to tell you where you can find it and what the process is going to be. I think Erica detailed the steps that we're asking the Assembly to consider with the changes to Title 28 and the Observer's Manual. So let me just give you a little bit of an overview. The Observer's Manual is very old, and it was probably last significantly updated in 2017. And more recently, we discovered that there were some gaps in the Observer's Manual. And I think that the gaps are primarily that the Observer's Manual was probably in a lot of jargon. We're using a lot of election jargon in the Observer's Manual without a lot of explanation. And so that would be one issue that we realized we needed to address here. We needed to provide more explanation. And the second issue is that we've changed the Observer Manual so that the municipal clerk and the MOA elections team will provide training to the observers. In the past, I believe the state of Alaska, when they have observers or poll watchers, the state has the party or organization that the observer is representing do the training. And we think that's probably just too much to expect of people in municipal elections, since our elections are nonpartisan. So for that reason, the biggest change in the Observer's Manual is that the clerk's office is going to provide training. And the second biggest change is that we've included a lot more information so that we can educate observers about what the role of the observer is. And I think Erica can tell you this right at the very beginning of the Observer's Manual. It says that the observer and the clerk and the election workers have a shared goal and mission to make sure that the election is done right. So that's my big overview and the reason that we're here. And I think Erica can share again the information about where the info is available and what the timeline is before we get into the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Proceed, Ms. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for those of you who have not accessed this yet, the Observer Manual is posted on the Ethics and Elections Committee webpage. So if you go to the Assembly webpage, there's a committees link along the bar at the top. And if you go to the committees link and then you find the Ethics and Elections Committee, you'll find the draft Observer's Manual listed under the in the documents for today's meeting. So you can access it that way. We do have, this is a 2-hour work session scheduled to go over this Observer's Manual. handbook, there is a 1 hour meeting of the Ethics and Elections Committee, a special meeting organized for October 13th, which is in 2 weeks. It's a Wednesday from noon to 1, and that is where we'll do a final review of the draft ordinance that we discussed last week and the observer's manual, and see if there are committee members who would be willing to introduce this ordinance with its attachment of the handbook for introduction for consideration by the full assembly. Assuming that happens, there can be we would recommend that a work session of the full assembly be scheduled, and that the assembly set 2 public hearings for this item, as there's always a lot of interest in elections. So that's the proposed schedule going forward. And with that, Mr. Chair, unless you have anything else you'd like to start with, I can start walking through the manual or handbook.
Thanks, Erica. Continue.
Thank you. Oops. Okay. It's contact information, revision log. Here in the table of contents, I just want to make a general statement that the handbook has sort of 2 big sections. The first section up until about page 17 has to do with observers very specifically. And then the second section, which starts at about page 17, is an overview of the election process. So that it has these sort of 2 big chunks. So here at the beginning is an introduction, the purpose of the handbook to familiarize observers with relevant election laws, define the observer's responsibilities and obligations. It is not intended as a complete summary of election law, but as a useful guide. And in the event of conflict between the handbook and the law is, of course, controlling. And this is part of what Barbara mentioned at the beginning, that it is the objective of election officials and observers to protect our democratic right of the right to vote. The integrity of the election is important to all citizens, and though observers may represent a particular candidate or sort of side of a ballot measure, the principal interest is in the conduct of a fair and honest election. Okay, this is what the observers are. They are monitors of the election process to ensure that their interest in a fair and honest election is represented. They are allowed at each election location, which is a vote center or a polling location during a poll-based election, and the designated return location, which is the election center, and is how we'll refer to that for the rest of the document. Observers are given more access than the general public because observers have agreed to follow certain rules and expectations that are set forth in the handbook. The role of the observer is to witness and, as necessary, ask procedural questions. They may challenge the eligibility of individual voters or the manner in which votes are counted. They may lodge complaints. They should not and may not interfere with voters or disrupt the conduct of the election. And they should be familiar with electoral law, procedures, and the election calendar. They should monitor constructively, work with election officials in a courteous and factual manner, and maintain a high level of respect for voters, the process, and the election officials. An observer has to be designated by either a candidate on the ballot in that particular election, or by an organization or organized group that sponsors or opposes a ballot measure, which would be, one of the things on the ballot that is not a candidate. And a candidate is allowed to be an observer. We talked about the number of observers in our last meeting when we were looking at the code, and candidates and organizations are allowed to assign one observer at each vote center or polling location and not more than 4 observers at the election center. We did discuss that there can be space or regulatory constraints which would require the municipal clerk to reduce the number of observers. And there was some discussion about whether each candidate would be guaranteed a single observer. And I think that we have, when you look at our April ballot this past year, we had, sorry, I'm going to add this up as I talk. We had 15 candidates for mayor. We had probably at least another 15 school board candidates, and we had 11 ballot measures, which could be, if you had a pro and con for each one, that would be 22 observers. So, that's a total of 52 if each of those people and entities get at least one observer. And of course, you could have more than 1 or 2 organizations per ballot measure. So I think, in our worst case scenario, we really could have a problem trying to guarantee each candidate or organization one candidate. But we did propose saying here in the last sentence, the reduction in the number of observers to fewer than 1 per candidate shall be limited to extraordinary circumstances, trying to recognize the fact that it's highly unlikely that we would be in a situation where every single candidate on the ballot and multiple organizations for each ballot member would be submitting a candidate. Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
Go ahead, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Erica, there was never a situation where people had to be asked to leave because there were too many in there, which left any single candidate or single issue representative unrepresented as an observer during our election. Can you speak to that as whether or not this has ever actually happened, where we've boiled it down to one, or where people from different candidacies were actually non-represented? Thanks.
Ms. Kennedy, through the chair, no limitations beyond what's in code on the number of observers were put in place in either 2021 or 2020, which are the 2 elections or the 2 election seasons that I have experience with. So in 2021, we were able to accommodate up to 4 observers per candidate or organization for each one that requested it.
Okay, thank you. Because I think I mentioned it last time. I have significant concerns about the potential for one person from any particular candidate or organization to be the one that is selected, so to speak, even if it is a lottery kind of a thing, to actually be the single observer. So I can't imagine the kinds of lawsuits that would come forward and challenges to the election if that ever happened. So, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Gates?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that I know this is the observer handbook, but I think it might be helpful to reference a code citation for that part. The extraordinary, limited to extraordinary circumstances. We do have, I think in code, we have the emergency situation and chapter for emergencies, and that may not be applicable to every extraordinary circumstance. You have our Title 28 update. So anyways, like we have in the first line here, cite to the code, I think the limit to extraordinary circumstances would be helpful to have a cite to the code here as well, as notice to all the observers who are being trained from this manual as to what could happen and under authority of code.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gates. Ms. Kennedy?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just kind of to follow up with that idea of extraordinary circumstances or an emergency situation. If things got that bad to be so extraordinary or to be of such an emergency, wouldn't the whole process just be shut down in order to basically regroup and then try to get back on track with proper processes? You know, that kind of concerns me too. Anyway, you know, again, I just find that whole section really problematic, in spite of the fact that somebody could say, well, this is an extenuating circumstance. So maybe somebody can comment on really that whole idea of whether or not an emergency or extenuating circumstances would actually require something a little more drastic in terms of how we respond, not just kicking people out. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Do you have a comment on that, Mr. Gates?
Oh, yes, thank you. And you know, this is one of the challenges of drafting law in a whole bunch of contexts. So it's kind of impossible to set out a list of every single sort of extraordinary circumstance that might, you know, warrant, I guess, doing something like this, limiting the number of observers and things like that. It's really impossible for ordinary people to think and list every single circumstance that might come up and then just follow a list. That's why you see terms like this used often in the law, extraordinary circumstances. You mentioned, you know, an emergency, wouldn't we just pause and stop? I mean, sure, if it's an earthquake or if it's a flood or something, but maybe other extraordinary circumstances can happen, such as the last regular election, we had 15 candidates. What if we had 25, you know, and 4 observers each? We don't have the space. That's kind of not an ordinary circumstance for the history of municipal elections in Anchorage or Alaska, I think. So, you know, it's not necessarily an emergency, but it's a very extraordinary circumstance. So, I mean, those are just 2. Could I think of them all? I don't think so. But you need to have a sort of flexibility so that when circumstances present themselves, you're able to adjust. And when you say we should pause, well, I think that absolutely the municipal clerk does pause and consider everything that's happening in every circumstance that comes up and what kind of a response would be appropriate. And as they did in developing this manual and looking at their history. So maybe not every thing that comes up will justify the pause of the whole process or the counting or reviewing of envelopes or so forth. You know, it's just the circumstances that come up. It's really the municipal clerk as the election administrator's responsibility to address them and address them appropriately, and in what scope is that response and how large and reactive that response is. Just depends on what is happening. But you need that flexibility rather than trying to define it in a code.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gates. And I just happen to think that, you know, if there was a fire or if the fire alarm went off, then they would have to, you know, have a fire drill or exit the building as safely as possible. And it's hard to come up with every scenario, you know, that could
Mr.
possibly
Chair.
happen. Ms. Kennedy?
Well, thanks. If I can follow up a bit on that, or if we can have a little more of a conversation, maybe. I mean, basically what this is saying, and I haven't really read the code, so I'd have to look at that particular part, but what this is telling me is that there could be a point by which the municipal clerk could say, okay, all observers but 1 need to leave right now. And I I understand the idea of doing a lottery to pick one person, but the whole concept from the beginning is that you would never want to limit one candidate over another, or one organization or issue over another, in order to respond to an emergency. So I'm just wondering, really at what point do we, I don't think we could ever allow that, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't think that's acceptable ever. And if it is an emergency enough that you have to make all these people leave, then something else is going on, and that needs to be reconciled, if you will, before the process could legitimately continue. So I just am really concerned about that. And I certainly understand flexibility, but I mean, yes, you can have a lot of different emergencies, and so you can't list them all. But I'm thinking about, okay, what if, an election worker, no, not even an election worker, what if an observer has some kind of a heart-related event, and now you've got two paramedics in there, and you've got people scattered, kind of everybody concerned about what's going on in the middle of everything, has nothing to do with the election itself, and it's not really it's not an emergency that everybody's involved in, yet it's something going on in the facility, and you can't just say, okay, all the observers out, and then the election workers continue to work on the election. So anyway, so that's why I'm trying to figure out is really how solid or how airtight is the decision that would basically call something an emergency, and the actual recourse at that point would be to take that pause, to shut everything down, make everybody leave at that point, but actually pause the process. I just think we need some better guidance on really what is acceptable in terms of telling all the observers, or all but one observer, they have to leave. So thank you. That's just my thoughts, and I will wrestle a little bit with maybe some language, but just so you all know what I'm thinking. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And I have a little experience with state elections, and they allow no more than 2 people per candidate or initiative. And so it's the candidate designates who that is, if it's the candidate himself, campaign manager, whatever. But that's my experience with the state. Do you have a comment, Ms. Jones?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I would like to work with Ms. Kennedy on some better language for this section that would address her concerns. So, Ms. Kennedy, I will be in touch with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You betcha.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Gates, you have a follow-up?
Oh, well, I was going to say similar as Mrs. Jones, that Ms. Kennedy, I would like to work with you on some language. I guess the handbook isn't what I work on, but if it's for code or something, we can work on something to ensure we're protecting the integrity of the process and the right of persons to have an observer for their campaign present.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Gates. And I guess we can continue, Ms. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next section relates to observer registration, and this mirrors what we proposed for code, that an observer has to be registered within a certain period of time. And that period of time depends on whether we're talking about a regular election, a special election, or a runoff election. And I'll just talk about the regular election, that the start of the observer registration period would be the day after the candidate withdrawal deadline. And that is usually around the end of January, the beginning of February, and that it would end at 22 days before the election, which is the day before the deadline to mail ballot packages. So this gives a nice long period, 40 days for observers to be registered. And within that period of time, it is also when we propose to offer training for the observers And the reason that the cutoff is around the day that ballot packages are mailed is that's when, you know, we really start to get very busy and don't have time to be processing observer registrations and providing training. So there's similar deadlines again for special elections and the runoff election. We clarify that observers who are registered for a regular election may observe during a runoff election without submitting another registration form, as long as the candidate for whom they're observing is in the runoff election. The time period for runoff election is for new observers in the runoff election. The registration form has to be signed by the observer and the candidate's campaign manager or chairperson of the organization or organized group. Observers are allowed to see information that is confidential. This may include specific confidential information about voters, and thus observers are required to submit a confidentiality agreement stating that they will not reveal that confidential information to a third party or use it for any other purpose than for determining whether or not to challenge. The confidentiality agreement must come in with the registration form, and information regarding election processes, such as dates and times when the vote centers, election center or polling places will be opened, or will either be publicly noticed or posted on the elections website. So that's where observers can find information about when to be at particular locations. Observer training, as Barbara mentioned at the beginning, this is a new section that is being proposed. So all observers shall complete at least one training provided by the municipal clerk's office, essentially, or the elections team, prior to being issued an observer identification badge. Effort will be made to offer 3 training sessions before a regular election, 2 before a special election, and 1 before a runoff election. We'll have the proposed schedule of trainings along with how to sign up by the end of the candidate filing period. And we do encourage early signups, as it's possible the number of allowed attendees at each training session could be limited. And if nobody signs up for a training session at least 24 hours in advance, then the session will be canceled. An observer who has not attended a training session within the 6 months prior to the election will not be credentialed and may not observe. So if there's a special election within a couple months of a regular election, and so the observer had attended training for the regular election within 6 months of the special election, they wouldn't need to re-attend the training session. If we've received the registration form, the confidentiality agreement, and the observer has attended the training session, then they will be issued an identification badge, which must be signed by the candidate, campaign manager, or chairperson before the observer may begin to observe at the election location. Observer rights and obligations. The observer has to sign in at whatever election location they are going to observe at and show their signed observer badge. They must wear their badge in a noticeable location at all times. They should make sure that they're wearing it with only the front showing, which has the observer name, and not the back, because the back has the name of the candidate or organization for whom they are observing. And if that is visible, that is considered a campaigning violation. At the election center, they are also required to wear an identifying lanyard, which will be provided to them when they sign in. These are the rules in code about limitations on campaigning inside or within 200 feet of the entrance of a vote center, polling location, or the election center, and within 50 feet of a drop box. It states what campaigning includes and encourages an observer to report someone else campaigning should they see that happening. Observers may watch setup procedures before a vote center or polling location opens. They may observe official ballots being prepared for distribution. They may watch the conduct of the election, and they may remain at the election location until all procedures are complete. But observers have no duties in the conduct of the election. These are the rules of observer conduct. Observers are encouraged to work in shifts to minimize disruptions, but they may come and go from the locations within the limitations on number of observers, and following the requirements for signing in and out. As noted earlier, the opening time of all election locations will be publicly noticed or posted on the website, and election officials will not start work earlier than the opening time that is noticed. But election officials will also not wait for the arrival of observers to begin conducting work.
Can I ask a question about that, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Ms. Kennedy.
Oh, thank you. In regard to not starting, I think there were some complaints last election that people were in there working before the observers went in. So can you explain? I mean, I'm sure there were people in there probably doing something to get ready or whatever, whether they were handling ballots or not. I don't want to say they were or weren't, but can you explain a little bit about what kind of activity might be going on before or even after the official ballot counting process was actually underway? Thanks.
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, certainly the first thing that election officials need to do when they arrive here at the election center is turn off the alarm and perform a security check. So those are actions that are unrelated to processing ballots and would happen, with only election officials present. But our intent is that election officials will arrive at the opening time that is publicly noticed.
Okay, so if I could follow up on that, Mr. Chair. Again, there was a claim that there were things going on outside of the times that observers were told were going to be processing times. So is there a way to kind of help reassure the public that none of that activity, whatever it is, maybe somebody's putting ink in a printer, or maybe somebody's emptying the trash, I don't know. But anyway, is there a way of reassuring the public that even when there are employees in there, if you have said ballot counting happens between this hour and that hour, that's exactly what the public should be able to recognize or be able to confirm?
Ms. Jones?
Ms. Kennedy, this paragraph is directly in response to those concerns, and it exactly addresses them. The policy is that, and I can't quite see it, Erica, if you could scroll down a little bit. The policy is that, I'm trying to read it. The time the location is open will be publicly noticed, and the observers can be there as soon as the opening time. And I think if you scroll up a little bit farther, Erica, other direction, observers are allowed to see the opening. I think that's in a polling location. Very good, right up there. Observers can watch the setup procedures before they open. Now, so I'm letting you know that this paragraph is a rewrite to make sure that observers know that they can watch those processes. I will tell you the one exception is what Erica said on the security sweep, you know, and that's super important that, you know, when we open the door, I think what we did was the observers had to wait at the door because you want to make sure that no one's been in the election center and no security issues have occurred since we left the night before. And if they did, then we need to stop, like you said before, Miss Kennedy, and pause and address that security issue before we start our regular opening or processing. So I think that these two new sections address exactly what you're raising, Miss Kennedy.
Oh, good, great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you, Ms. Jones. And I believe we also have cameras that are running all the time. And so everything is being recorded for, you know, if someone needed to review that at some point in the future. Okay, continue, Ms. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 2, observers may be present in designated locations inside the election location that allow the observer a full view of all actions regarding ballot preparation and ballot return processing. That said, at vote centers and polling locations, the designated observer locations are not to be behind election officials and shall be a minimum of 6 feet away from voting booths and the ballot box to ensure the privacy of voters. And at drop boxes shall be a minimum of 10 feet away from the drop box. Observers shall not approach voters or talk directly to voters. Observers should hold any conversations that they may wish to have among themselves outside of the election location or in specific areas designated by the clerk to avoid distracting election officials from their duties. Electronic or mechanical devices such as cell phones, laptops, tablets, cameras, or the like are not allowed in designated areas in election locations, and observers shall not take pictures or video or record audio within designated areas. Telephone calls may only occur in designated locations or outside the election location. Observers shall not record confidential voter information by any means. Coats and large bags are not allowed except in designated areas. Observers are encouraged to leave these types of personal items in their vehicles or at their homes. Only water in sealable containers is permitted in designated areas. Other types of food and drink are limited to specific areas as designated by the municipal clerk. And in vote centers and in the election center, observers who again are properly badged and are allowed into areas that are not necessarily the or that are beyond the what we call the yellow brick road, which is the public pathway here at the election center, may not carry any device that is capable of marking a ballot, such as a blue or black pen, but may carry a red pen for taking notes. Questions should be submitted to the municipal clerk or the municipal clerk's designee, and at a polling location or vote center, the chair of that location is the designee. Observers may not touch or handle ballot envelopes, ballots, election materials or equipment, security equipment and fixtures or computers in election locations. Observers may not be disruptive or impolite and are encouraged to establish a cooperative relationship. Observers shall follow all reasonable directions of election officials, the municipal clerk, and on-site security personnel. And any observer who creates a public disturbance may be asked to leave the location. These rules are to be followed, and candidates and organizations are responsible for the proper conduct of their observers. Observers who do not comply may be removed and may have their observer credentials revoked. If that happens, the municipal clerk will notify, not necessarily before, but may afterwards notify the candidate, campaign manager, or the chairperson. Challenges. There are 4 types of challenges that a registered observer may make. They may challenge voter eligibility. They may challenge that a ballot was not properly cast or was improperly rejected. They may challenge signature verification, or they may challenge the adjudication of a vote. These are the only allowed challenges, and other concerns may be addressed through a complaint procedure that is also set forth later on in the handbook. Challenging of voter eligibility is set forth in the code, and a voter can be challenged because the observer believes the voter is not a citizen, the voter is not 18 years of age by the date of the election, the voter is not a resident of the municipality or the district in which the person seeks to vote at least 30 days before, which is the deadline to be registered, or the voter is registered to vote in another jurisdiction. This challenge must be made in writing on a form provided. And if such a challenge is received, the challenged ballot envelope will be separated from the other ballot envelopes and put in a secure location. The challenge filed by the observer must be validated by having the challenge form, the copy of the challenge form signed by the candidate, the campaign manager, or the chairperson of the organization within 24 hours, not counting weekends, of when the observer submitted the challenge form. Otherwise, the challenge is not validated and the challenge ballot envelope will be returned for continued processing. If the challenge is validated by the candidate, campaign manager, or chairperson, the municipal clerk or designee will respond in writing, and that challenge will be shared with all candidates or organized groups who have registered observers for the relevant race or issue. If the response of the municipal clerk or designee is unsatisfactory to the candidate, campaign manager, or chairperson, they may appeal to the Anchorage Election Commission by refiling a validated challenge within 24 hours of receiving the municipal clerk's response, and then that would go to the Election Commission at the public session of canvass. Challenging a ballot that was not properly cast or was improperly rejected. This is set forth regarding the standards in 2870.030. So reasons that a ballot may not be properly cast or was improperly rejected could relate to the voter not signing the voter declaration. A voter who was unable to sign did not make a mark or have their mark properly witnessed. The voter's ballot envelope was received after the election and was either not postmarked, postmarked after the election, or the postmark was unreadable. The ballot was received after 8 p.m. on the date of the election, if not returned by mail. So that would be, too late at a drop box or too late at a vote center. The voter already voted in the election. The voter did not provide the required identification before the opening of the public session of canvass, or the voter's ballot was rejected improperly for one of these reasons. Again, this type of challenge must be provided in writing on a form that will be part of this handbook. And basically, similar to the challenge of voter qualifications, The challenge ballot envelope would be segregated. The challenge must be validated with the signature of the candidate, campaign manager, or chairperson within 24 hours. The municipal clerk or designee would respond in writing. Challenges and
Excuse me, Ms. McConnell.
yes, sorry.
Ms. Kennedy, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Erica, can you go back to the section about a ballot being denied because it was dropped at a drop box too late or after the date or something like that? Does that actually happen? Can somebody actually put a ballot in a drop box past the date of the election? Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy. So the drop boxes are closed at exactly 8 o'clock on election night, but my experience, so I closed one of the drop boxes in 2020, and my experience is that while the election officials are then pulling the ballots out of the drop boxes, people will come up and they'll be, a minute late or 5 minutes late, and they will want to give their ballot to the election official. And while we do provide information to those voters through a handout that says you may consider trying to go to the post office, because our airport post office does have hours that extend, at least at this time, hours that extend beyond 8 o'clock at night, sometimes the voter will insist upon giving their ballot to the election official. Those are segregated in a red bag as being received after the close of the election. So that does happen.
Okay. All righty. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Continue, Ms. McConnell.
Thank you. Okay, so we were talking about the responses to the challenge of a ballot that was not properly cast or was improperly rejected. So it's similar, like I said, to the voter qualification challenge. Challenges and responses are shared with all candidates or organized groups who have registered observers for the relevant race or issue, and can be appealed to the Anchorage Election Commission by refiling a validated challenge within 24 hours of receiving the municipal clerk's response. The third challenge is challenge of signature verification, and this is also set forth in 2870.030, and an observer may challenge that a signature was improperly determined to be invalid or improperly determined to be valid. The challenge must be submitted in writing on a form provided. And if challenged, the ballot envelope signature will be elevated to the municipal clerk and the deputy clerk, who shall review the signature on the challenged ballot envelope to make a final determination. And the signature verification challenges that are signed by the candidate, campaign manager, or chairperson shall be provided to the municipal prosecutor after certification of the election, along with a copy of the ballot envelope image and a copy of available reference signatures. Challenging the adjudication of a vote. So this occurs after the ballot envelope has been accepted for processing, has been opened, the separation of the envelope, which has the name of the voter, from the ballot, which of course has no identifying information as to who the voter is, has already happened. So at this point, the ballot is anonymous, but there has been some sort of marking on the ballot that leads it to be brought up for adjudication. And the rules for adjudicating a vote exist at 2880.050. And so the reasons for challenging the adjudication of a vote would be that the observer believes that the rules were improperly applied by election officials. So the improper interpretation of the oval being partially or wholly filled in, an improper interpretation of the voter's correction, improper interpretation of markings or handwritten notes, or improper interpretation of a write-in vote. Similar to the other challenges, this one must be submitted in writing on the form provided. Upon receipt of this type of challenge, the municipal clerk or designee will review the challenge and make a determination. This type of challenge may be, the determination may be appealed to the election commission by resubmitting the validated challenge within 24 hours. And challenges will be shared with all candidates or organizations who have registered observers for the relevant race or issue. Election official conduct is not a challengeable item under the code, but an observer may file a complaint or bring a complaint about election official conduct to the municipal clerk. If they wish to submit it in, they may be asked to submit it in writing, and there is a form provided for that at the end of the handbook. If the complaint is unresolved, copies will be shared with all candidates or organizations who have registered observers for the particular race or issue. And the complaint may be appealed or requested to be brought to the Anchorage Election Commission at the public session of canvass. And noted here that the municipal code at 2810 does state that a candidate or 10 qualified voters may contest an election due to malconduct, fraud, or corruption on the part of an election official sufficient to change the result of the election. Okay, that is the end of the kind of what I think of as section 1 about observers, and the remainder of the handbook relates to the election process. It provides a general overview of the election process. This part of the handbook is not intended to address every possible circumstance, and of course applicable law controls. This section serves as a refresher, but does not replace the required training for observers. At a polling location or vote center, election officials conduct the election. There is a chair who's primarily responsible at that location. These officials conduct the election, administer voting procedures, determine voter qualifications, and maintain decorum at the location and within 200 feet of any entrance or within 50 feet of a secure drop box. Only certain people other than election officials and observers are allowed to remain in a polling location or vote center. Of course, that would include voters while they are voting, representatives from the municipal clerk's office or the municipal attorney's office, or members of the news media. This next section talks briefly about the voting process. There is a requirement to show ID unless the voter is personally known to the election official. Sets forth what is acceptable ID, which is set forth in state law. If a voter does not have identification and is not personally known by an election official, the voter is allowed to vote a question ballot. And a voter may bring materials to assist them to a vote center or polling location, but they are expected to take the materials away with them, and anything they leave behind will be disposed of immediately. Here's a brief explanation of what question ballots are. They are ballots voted by a voter whose qualifications need to be more closely examined before the ballot can be accepted for counting. They are placed, the ballot return envelope from the voter is placed inside a second question envelope that is segregated for special handling. And in accordance with code, this is a listing of people who may only vote a question ballot. So not having proper identification, as mentioned above, if their address is different from what is in the voter database and they do not choose to vote an area-wide ballot, if their name is different, although there are allowances in code for nicknames. if their qualifications are questioned by an election official or an observer or another voter, or if their name does not appear in the voter registration database. So those people must vote a question ballot. There can be voters who need assistance, and in that case, they are allowed to ask one or two people to assist them, which includes going into the voting booth with them. They may ask election officials to assist them. If any other person is requested to be an assistant, they have to sign the voter assistant register, which includes an oath that they will not vote the ballot for the voter, coerce the voter, or divulge the vote cast by the voter. And as we talked last week when we were discussing the code changes, we are proposing amendments that make this very similar to the special needs representative about who can assist a voter is now proposed to be similar to who can take a special needs ballot to a voter. The person providing assistance can read the ballot and may mark the voter's ballot for the voter, but may not sign for the voter. The voter can make a mark or an X in their signature space and have the assistant as their witness. A brief statement about voter instructions. There are instructions posted in each voting booth. We also have a handout for voter instructions, which is the same thing that is provided in the mailed ballot package that goes to each voter. But if a voter needs additional instructions from an election official, they can be done out in full view and should be done before the voter enters the voting booth. At the election center, all voted ballots in return envelopes are brought to the election center using security procedures to ensure chain of custody for processing. The review of ballot return envelopes may commence upon receipt, and no votes shall be tabulated before 8 p.m. on election day or the closing of the polls, whichever is later. These are just sort of restatements from code. And the review process. Teams of election officials perform the following tasks. They run each ballot return envelope through the mail sorter machine, which documents the receipt of the envelope from the voter and captures an electronic image of the voter's signature. There is signature verification by election officials who are trained, and each signature is reviewed by a minimum of 2 trained election officials. This is our review and resolution procedure that we contact the voter by first-class mail if there is an issue with their signature. And this explains the letter that we send to them does explain to the voter how they can cure the issue. We open ballot return envelopes and align and flatten the ballots, scan the ballots through the scanners, adjudicate improperly marked ballots, qualified write-ins, and blank ballots, and after 8 p.m. on election day, tabulate the votes. The review requirements are set forth in code, and a ballot shall be counted if all of the following are true. The voter is qualified to vote. The voter declaration is signed with a valid or verified signature, or if the voter is unable to sign their name, the voter makes a mark on the signature line and has a witness sign and write their name. The ballot is timely received, as we've talked about, postmarked no later than election day, received by the opening of the public and session of canvass, or if coming from a military or overseas voter, received no later than noon on the day of certification of the election, deposited in a drop box no later than 8 p.m., voted at a vote center before the closing of the election, or received by fax or email no later than 8 p.m. on election day, and that the voter has not already voted in the election. So those, again, are the review requirements. Question ballots, as we mentioned earlier, we talked about who's required to vote a question ballot. This is about the review of question ballots. Each question ballot is reviewed by 2 election officials, and those election officials will make a determination about whether the voter is qualified or not qualified, and if qualified, were they qualified to vote the ballot that they voted as a full count, or did they vote a ballot in which they're not qualified to vote in all the races on that ballot, and thus only some of the races would they be qualified to vote for? And in that situation, the ballot would need to be facsimiled onto an area-wide ballot because only the voter may be qualified to vote only for those area-wide races. The facsimile process, so for a partial count ballot, or if a ballot is damaged and cannot be processed through the scanner, 2 election officials create a facsimile ballot, making an exact copy of the ballot markings onto a new blank ballot. And we have very specific procedures that allow us to keep the original ballot and the facsimile ballot designated so that you can always rematch the 2 together in case there are challenges. Adjudication, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but this is set forth in code about proper and improper marks on the ballot. Improper marks invalidate only that section of the ballot in which they appear. So if someone has improperly marked a school board race, but properly marked, you know, the mayor's race and all the propositions, only the school board race could be invalidated. It wouldn't invalidate the other races. So this sets forth what are valid marks and invalid marks, and this is in our current observer handbook. This has not changed. And then the next section sets forth the ballot reject codes that the ways in which we group ballots for reporting to the Election Commission and the Assembly. So when we come to the Election Commission during the public session of canvass, we tell them we have provisionally rejected X number of ballots under code D for a duplicate ballot envelope. And we have provisionally rejected Y number of ballots under code E for being empty or containing, not a ballot and materials other than a ballot. So these are all of the reject codes, and for those assembly members, committee members, you may recognize these from the report that is provided to you from the Election Commission at certification that explains how many ballots were rejected and for what reason. So I'm just going to skip through all the rest of those. The public session of canvass. Provisionally rejected ballots and ballot return envelopes are brought to the Election Commission at the public session of canvass. This is a public meeting that's required to be held on or before the 3rd Friday after Election Day. The Election Commission reviews all the provisionally rejected ballots or ballot return envelopes and votes on whether or not to count the ballot. For those that the Election Commission rejects, the municipal clerk mails a letter to each voter within 30 days of certification of the election. And again, this is a code requirement. Election certification, as soon as practical after the public session of canvass, the Election Commission and the municipal clerk report to the Assembly. If after considering the information, the Assembly determines that the election was validly held, the Assembly shall certify the results of the election. There are multiple reasons for why there may be a recount. A recount may be requested by a defeated candidate or 10 qualified voters. In that situation, there is a fee for the recount. The Assembly by resolution may order a recount. The municipal clerk on the clerk's initiative may order a recount if in the clerk's judgment the recount will increase or may increase voter confidence in the election process, or there are required recounts if a candidate wins by less than 0.5%, when a runoff election is required between the top two candidates and the second and third place candidates are separated by less than 0.5%, or if a proposition or measure passes or fails by less than 0.5%. In those situations, there must be a recount. And a candidate or 10 qualified voters may contest the election of any person or the approval or rejection of any question or proposition upon one of 3 grounds. This again is set forth in municipal code. Malconduct, fraud, or corruption on the part of an election official sufficient to change the result of the election. The person certified as elected is not qualified as required by law, or any corrupt practice as defined by law sufficient to change the result of the election. And that is the sort of the overview of the entire election process, and thus the end of the handbook. I don't have the challenge forms finished to present to you today, so I will get those off to you by email very soon.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McConnell. Are there any additional questions or comments from the committee members right now?
Pete, this is Christopher. I just would note that I've been here since almost the beginning.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Constant. Do you have any questions or comments?
None, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, not seeing any additional comments or questions from committee members. Do we have any, it's time for audience participation. Any members of the audience that would like to participate? Do you have a comment, Ms. Jones?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I hope that the committee and everyone in the meeting can see the additional work and effort that we've put into the observer manual to really provide more information, as Erica said, about the election process, and as well as clarify how observers go about challenging concerns about the election and filing a complaint. So we just think this is really much more voter and observer friendly, and we would appreciate any comments or suggestions. I'll be happy to work with Ms. Kennedy on the one section, but if you think there's anything else that we need to address, you can sure let us know and we'll work on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jones, and I appreciate all the work you went into updating this and trying to make it more easily understood. And it's something that was, since this handbook had been around for a long time, since it had been revised, it was something that was long overdue. And it's actually a pretty big project, so I want to thank you for taking that on. Any comments from the public or any additional comments or questions from committee members? I see Susan has her hand up. Please go ahead, Susan Riley. If you might be on mute. We can't hear you. Go ahead, Susan.
Sorry, the magic also. Thank you, Chair. And election official, I also really benefit of observers who have never been elected. The explanation process.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm unable to hear this.
Yeah, you're fading in and out, Ms. Riley.
Well, good work. I'm going to go review it. for myself, from my background as observer and election official. Directly to- Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other member of the public that would like to participate right now? Not seeing or hearing anyone. I'll take an motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, thank you. We are adjourned.